In this episode, we reviewed the Italian film Europa 51, which was directed by Roberto Rossellini. He wrote the screenplay with Sandro De Feo and Mario Panunzio, and the film starred Ingrid Bergman. And there also is an appearance from Giulietta Messina. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. I want to welcome back to the show Steve Norden, who is a Toronto-based writer and podcaster at screenfish.net. Steve, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Robert. I really do appreciate it. I've always enjoyed our conversations, so this will be fun.
Me too. And we discussed two noirs on the show so far. This is our first Italian film. Are you an Italian film fan in general? Like, are you a fan of the director of this film, Rossellini?
Well, I mean, I've never seen a film in English. I've only seen Italian films to this point. Okay. No, well, we were saying before we started recording, you find films I've never seen, and that's great because there are a lot of films that I should have. And anything with the last name Rossellini is something that should have crossed my eyes at some point. And no, I was new. If I've seen anything by Rossellini, it was probably back in the film school days.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
But they're not. I'm just getting into my Criterion collection subscription now.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that I love about our conversations is that I love old film. It's not that I don't love old film or or what have you. It's just it's one of those things. You've got so many things that you got to keep up with the day,
right?
In terms of new things you have to review. But I love classics and I love old films and I love an Italian filmmaking from. Is it the 1960s or 50s?
This is 52. This film, yeah.
I mean, I was excited as soon as you said let's do this one. I was like, this is fantastic. So I will not claim to be an expert. I will not make that claim. But I did, and I thought I was great. I thought it was a great pick.
So what did you think overall of this film on your first experience here?
Well, I mean, for me, I thought my dog is going to be. Leave me alone. Sorry. For me, for my first time viewing, I'll be honest. This sort of film, is just not even the type of film that I'm accustomed to seeing from 1950s style, which I thought was fantastic. I I loved that about it because. Anytime somebody says, "Hey, let's watch this," it's usually a noir or an old mob movie or a screwball comedy, one of those things. So for me, in terms of delving into this particular film, I was like, "This is so unlike what I expected." Now, again, as I was watching it, I'm like, "Well, this is filmmaking from Europe in that era," so in that sense, it fit into like. Okay, it started to fit into the boxes for me. But just in general, for a 1950s style film, I thought this is so unlike what I expected. And far more mature than I'd prepared myself for in terms of its concept of like it's dealing with some major issues.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Just even from suicide and mental health. From a film from 70 years ago, literally 70 years ago.
Right.
I thought that was fascinating because, again, those are issues that generally from the films I've seen are not discussed from that era,
Mm-hmm. So, you touched on mental health and suicide in this film. What to you was it about? I mean, what did you take from it?
What did I take? What was the film about?
Yeah, for you, like what was the essence of the film for you? What did you take away from it?
Well, I mean, to me, it was. I mean, the last 30 some odd minutes of the film is them debating her sanity and the nature of love.
Mm,
And
mm,
and that was just something that I thought was so refreshing, especially from a film from 7 decades ago,
right.
because even the church in this film struggles to understand the sort of love that she's discussing. And
Yes.
if we like, that's why I thought for a film that was made 70 years ago, it felt almost so contemporary because I mean, to look back on it, you just look at it and say, well, no, of course, that would just be expected in conversations today. But they're questioning her sanity due to the fact that she wants to be and live amongst the broken, the poor. The perspective shift on it was fascinating. And actually, I thought that was interesting too, because as I was watching it, I thought if this film were made today, there would be an even greater emphasis on the story from the perspective of those who were living in poverty.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
this film is very much from the perspective, at least at the beginning, of somebody who is coming from a bourgeois lifestyle, very wealthy, well-to-do, and she still sort of is throughout the film. Now, by the end, it's changed, and she's just saying, "I want everybody to look at these things." But I think if it were made today, the shift would have come completely from underneath,
I see
from
what you're
more
saying.
the perspective of the oppressed as opposed
Right.
from the oppressors.
Right. Right.
Um, but I thought, oh man, and that was I thought was fascinating. Again, these conversations taking place 7 decades ago on
Hmm.
screen in a way that I had not seen before from then.
Yeah, I mean it is a powerful portrait, and it more or less is the story of Saint Francis of Assisi, but in Italy in 1950s. I mean,
Yeah.
Rossellini was now married to Ingrid Bergman, and he said to her, we're gonna do Saint Francis of Assisi, but with you. And he had already done a film on Saint
Mm.
Francis of Assisi. And the more I read about Saint, I mean, I knew generally about him, and I saw that film that Rossellini made on him a number of years ago, so it's not fresh in my mind. But a lot of what is true of Saint Francis of Assisi is true of Ingrid Bergman's character here. I mean, he did come from a lot of money and a very wealthy family, and he didn't have much social consciousness until he began to see things differently. When people on the street would come up to him and ask him for money, and these different experience he was having. I mean, in this case, I love the opening. I mean, it was such a great, just visually, this elderly couple coming out of a well, they're on the street. I think they're, yeah, because they're walking on the street, and there's a transportation strike. And the one woman is complaining, why the hell do they have to go on strike? And the husband says, you don't have any social consciousness. And at that, right at that, and isn't that always the case when they're, I mean, we just had a strike that lasted a few days here in Ontario with in the public school system, in the school system in period. And people are always, like, just stop complaining, go back to work. And then you see the people like, oh no, come on, like, let's look at the issues here, right? And that's kind of always the case. And I love that it starts that way, and then right at that moment, Ingrid Bergman drives by with this big car, and she's clearly wealthy, and she is had doesn't have any social consciousness. It's as if that question was posed to her. She's very wealthy, this bourgeois life in Rome with her husband and child. And the first scene, she's clearly not very interested in her son. She's more interested in the fact that she has dinner guests coming over. And he's clearly just emotionally has serious emotional problems. I mean, he's talking about his problems at school, and I found her very dismissive. I mean, she even hits him at one point when he lashes out at her. And she's having these dinner guests, and they're on totally different sides of the political spectrum. We have like her cousin who's a communist, and Andrea, and then the other people are more conservative, right, on the right leaning. They don't say exactly, but you get that impression. And she doesn't want to talk about politics at all. She would rather talk about horses and now we're in the Cold War, right? I mean, this is Rossellini made films about the war, in neo-realist films in the mid to late 40s, and now here we are, and it's the Cold War, it's post World War II. And once that comes up, she doesn't want to talk about it. And the communist Andrea's like, he wants world peace, and the other people are skeptical. And even when she talks about it a little bit, she goes, well, he's more socialist, more left leaning. And then and I think one of the characters says, "Oh, is he a socialist?" And she says, "Worse than that," right? So you get the impression that she is just in her own world. And finally, this accident that happens, well, they think it's an accident where the child is, they find him at the bottom of the stairs, their son. And in the hospital, she finds out that he tried, this is intentional, that to he tried to commit suicide. And naturally she's distraught, and she goes to him and apologizes and says she's now going to give all her love and attention. And she also says something interesting, which is that they talk about the war, about like hiding in the bomb shelters. And so this child was born into that. And what I found interesting is that when he dies, which is, they didn't think he would die, and he suddenly dies. She's distraught, and she's out with Andrea, who's this communist, and she's blaming herself. And he says, and he has a point. I mean, he says you can't totally blame yourself. I mean, there are people born into war. There are people in right now living in poverty, and he tells a story about this family who can't afford medication for the child. And so whose fault is that? Is that the parents' fault that they're born into poverty and they can't? And so this brings her social consciousness up. But I found it interesting that throughout the film, she totally blames herself for what happens with the child. I mean, she sees what Andrea's saying, but you never feel that she blames anyone but herself about what happened to her son. I mean, was that your impression, or did you see it any other way?
Well, actually, one of the things I love about the fact that you brought up earlier is, not just that she blames her son, but that she was neglecting of her son. And I think that's where the blame comes, because, throughout the film, I think in some ways, and this is a poor comparison, forgive me, but it reminds me of the end of Schindler's List of, I could have just one more, just take one more. I wish there was one more. And so she didn't have enough love to be aware of her son's situation. So now she's gradually getting enough love to see everyone's situation.
Yeah.
And I love, you were talking about before about it being a highly political, being political film in its conversations. You were discussing, the communism and the war and these things.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, because I expected this to be a film. Now, maybe it's hard to make one of these in 1950s. I don't know. I expected it to be a film how capitalism is bad, communism's the way to go.
Right.
But it doesn't go there.
Not at all.
It cuts through both.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what I thought was that's why I think it comes down, like, so much of her journey comes down to love.
Yeah.
Because that cuts through every political situation.
Exactly.
And she even says, the paradise I dream of is not for the living, but for everyone. So he's talking about, we'll have this dialectical paradise, all these wonderful things. And she's like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
That's not what we need to worry about. And I thought that was so interesting and such a modern ethos in terms. And it's funny, you talk about Assisi. One of the things that he's best known for saying is preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words, because that was his belief, is be amongst the people.
Right.
Love the people, care for them. That's what it means to live out your faith. What it means to live out your faith is to care for the poor, which
yes.
sounds
to
like
live
Jesus.
amongst them. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why, by the end of the film, she's sitting there talking with the priest, and the priest is like, no, you have responsibilities to your husband. So,
Right, right.
this is
You
the
broke the
case
rules.
too. Yeah, watch those rules.
Yeah,
And she's like, my husband, like, I need to love these people. And I think the worst thing she was caught with is helping a prostitute. Like, I think
yeah,
that's what it's like. But
yeah.
now it's lurid behavior and all this stuff is fascinating.
I was really fascinated by that as well. And when once they bring her and they commit her into the hospital and the priest comes, I actually thought the priest was going to be able to see what she was talking about, and he actually can't. Because again, and actually they I don't know if you got a chance to see some of the featurettes that are on the Criterion channel for this. But this film scholar, Elena Dagrada, she was really interesting. What she was talking about in terms of Italy at this time was that she was talking about how daring this film actually was, because there was a lot of pressure in Italy at that time to choose which political side of the spectrum you were on. You're either, and at that time it was like the Christian Democrats and the Communist Party. And so here we have a character who is, everyone's trying to label her. I mean, you get the impression that the priest thinks that she's talking about wanting to be a nun or something, and she's like, no, I'm just talking about loving and loving everybody and sharing my love with everybody. And he thinks that's crazy, and the doctors think it's crazy that, like, they're like, are you a communist, are part of a religious group? And she's like, no. And so she's talking about things that are common sense, but everyone is pressuring her to choose something in order, because they can't make sense of it otherwise. And today, watching this, people probably may have a hard time grasping how daring this was. But then if you think about it, if you had, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, if you had a main character like this now, and the choice, it was a similar story where people were pressuring her to choose either to be more left leaning or right leaning, and they were saying, well, I choose neither. I think that would be hard for people to, I mean, politics now is probably more polarizing than ever, and there's so much pressure to choose sides and everything. We got a dog in our review.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm Paul. I don't know what she wants, but I'm trying to keep her quiet here because I'm
That's all
listening to you
right.
here.
She's enriching the conversation.
she she really liked the film herself,
Yeah.
and actually she wants to contribute.
Let's get her perspective on this. But I was thinking, I mean, it's one thing I find today is that if you say anything's, let's say, slightly left wing, and you're talking around conservative circles, they're going to think you're left wing. And if it goes the other way too, if you say something slightly conservative in a left wing circle, they're going to think you're that. I mean, there is these no matter how progressive you may be or how conservative you may be, those all come with their share of limits, I find. And it's I find that really appealing in terms of the context of this film, because people are trying to limit her and say, well, you must be choosing something. Like, what do you want to do? And she says, I just choose love. I mean, I was curious if, like, do you see that as daring? I mean, if that were to be how life is, politics today, I mean, I think that would be daring now.
Well, it's interesting because I think it depends on who you're talking to. So, for
Right.
example, I think this is a film that could easily be made today, and that was one of the things that surprised me of how current
Yeah.
that runs. In the sense that I think if Hollywood wants to make a film about social action, this is the type of film or this is the type of character that they could still make today. Ironically, I don't know if they could have made it between now and then, but I feel like today they could. At the same time, in reality, outside of film circles, I think it's highly politicized, and I think you're absolutely right, because I mean, Canada is a little different than our American cousins.
Right.
but the world of American theology is tied so heavily, so much more heavily to politics,
Yeah.
that, you know, to be a member of the quote evangelical community, at once was just considered to be Republican, and now it's even considered to be aligned with more the toxicity of Trump. Like, it's really, that term
Yeah.
has taken on new meaning,
Yes. Yeah.
and to show support to social programs labels you a quote liberal.
Right. Right.
um and you're, and that happens up here. I'm not saying it
Oh
doesn't, but
yeah. Yeah.
it seems a little more charged to the south. But so in reality, it is very interesting to walk in the middle,
Mm.
where you have some people that'll say, hold on, don't be too generous with your social action, just, you know, because you got to follow those rules.
Right.
um and yet you've got other people. I think that social action is, maybe this is a Canadian thing or not, but it's so embedded in our ethos at this time, this idea of social action, that in some ways, those who fall further on the left may feel that it's not like, well, you're tying it to faith now. You're saying that this is a faith thing. Well, that's all well and good, but maybe you're not pushing hard enough.
Right.
Um, but I mean, in terms of watching it in the story, the meaning of the story, the heart of the story, I'm like, this taps in exactly where we're at today.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It does. Yeah.
Unbelievably. And you know, we've got people who are like, this is a woman who has endured trauma. It's opened her eyes, and now she's in, basically being incarnating herself, if you will, and saying, I'm going to live amongst these people. And
Yeah.
she's branded crazy for it. And I use
Right.
that, I use that word. They, at the end, they actually say, well, I don't know what she is. She's either an insane woman or a missionary. Which,
Again, these labels, right?
it's back to the labels.
Yeah, and they thought that of Francis of Assisi as well. I mean, they
Yeah.
thought he was they thought he was crazy. Yeah, I found that really fascinating, and you're right, because you know, early in the film, because she's with Andrea, it does seem as if the film is going to say, oh yes, the you know, communism is good and everything, and this is the way we should go. But it's not that at all, because she does, you know, she's taking the lead from Andrea, who brings her to the slums of Rome and shows her these people who are, you know, there's like 12 people in one room and there's no jobs, and they're just saying, hey, you know, if only we could have like the industries and factories here. These people are lucky to have one day of work as a day laborer. And so she's like, okay, you know, she pays for the you know, she's wealthy, so she pays for the medication the child needs. And then she meets Giulietta Messina, who's the woman, I forgot she was in this actually.
Yeah.
The woman who's like you know, she's taking care of like 6 kids, or not even
Yeah.
all of her kids, and she's so happy, and you know, she's helping her with the children. And then she says the same thing, oh, if I could just get a job. And so she goes to Andrea, they get her a job in the factory, and so she can't start yet because she's got like this date lined up with this guy, which you see Ingrid Bergman at first is kind of like, yeah, I understand that, but don't you like need to like, isn't this more important? So she goes in her place until this woman, just for a couple of days, until this woman can work. And this is really an interesting scene, because these factories, she's like disturbed by them. I mean, they're so loud. They, you know, they look like they look like a prison sentence, as she calls it. And that's what she says to Andrea, like, you know, how is this gonna solve anything? You're just gonna give them these jobs that, as she sees it, are terrible. And he says, and he has a point, which she sees. He's like, well, you know, it's starvation, or at least they're able to earn a living. And then she goes into the movie theater and watches a documentary about these the industries and the factories. And one thing, and I was curious if this popped out to you, one thing that Elena Dagrada, who on the Criterion Channel, this film scholar, said was that the fact that the machines were, you know, they're spiraling, everything's like going in circles. The documentary, she's watching the water like going down and it's spiraling downwards. And Ingrid Bergman looks disturbed by all this, and she says that she felt that that was reminding her of the staircase her son jumped down, because the staircase is a spiraling staircase down. And that didn't really pop up to me. I'm not sure if that necessarily, I wonder if that was even Rossellini's intention, because I'm not sure if that was suggested at all. I'm not saying that her interpretation is invalid, and I wonder if that was more of a coincidence, just these circles, but maybe not. Maybe that just went over my head. So it makes me wonder if there is enough doubt in this film about her mental state. I mean, clearly the film is saying that it's sympathizing with her. I mean, a lot of what she's saying is true and right. But at the same time, I can understand why people would think, hang on a second, there's something not right. She just went through this trauma. You know, she is saying that these people shouldn't even work in a factory. You know, because that is reminding her of her son jumping down a spiraling staircase. I wonder if there is enough doubt in what the people are thinking about her, if some of that is valid, or did you feel that Rossellini was just much more on her side and her point of view?
Oh, I think he was.
Yeah,
I think
certainly.
100%. I had not picked that up with the spiraling thing. I mean, there's the scene where she goes like this and she's walking by.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about the factories per se is I love the cinematography.
Oh yeah.
Love it.
So loud too, those machines. There's no music. It's like, oh God.
And she's an ant. Several shots, she is just a tiny piece in and that's one of the things I took from that scene is her understanding how tiny pieces fit in the machine, or the machine is threatening to the tiny pieces, because everything is a threat in this massive factory. And every time you see her, it's a down spot camera, and it's just like she's dwarfed by what you see. So I noticed. In terms of her mental health, that was one thing I thought was very interesting, because again, mature conversation for the era. How often have we seen films from that era and they just don't know how to talk about people who've endured trauma or mental health issues?
Right.
This is again poor comparison, but I always think back to Miracle on 34th Street, and
that's
and they're trying to make sure Santa Claus must be insane. He must be insane. And it's, well, I can see you've got these issues and da 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 da. And I remember it's getting close to Christmas time. I mean, I'm thinking about these things already, but here we have somebody.
A good comparison. I like that. That's true.
Make a buck. Anyway. Oh, Albert. Yeah. But in this film, they show how nobody else understands the way she thinks, but they also allow for her trauma to have meaning. Like, I thought it was very interesting how they walked a fine line here. So she has endured a trauma. They don't portray her as quote unquote crazy because she goes off the deep end from the trauma. She never spirals in the way that I would have expected a film from this era to have done so. Like, I could have seen it where, all of a sudden she's running around frantically, or she just can't deal with it. Yeah, she's broken. She is bedridden a little bit, but she's at first she's broken. She's sad. She's looking for meaning, and the others can't see past that trauma. It's not that she ever lets go of the trauma, because we said before, she carries it with her every step of the way, for sure, the entire film. But the service, as I was watching it, her acts of service, her acts of love were a way of repentance for that. And I use the repentance term loosely, because I'm not suggesting she did anything wrong. But I am saying that penance, maybe penance is that word. It's like, well, I was wrong to miss this in my son before. I need to see this in others now.
Yeah.
I think her last line in the film is, "I'd rather be lost with them than saved alone."
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning,
Absolutely.
that's how she felt. My life is together.
Mm,
Son, stay in line.
yeah.
Together. Didn't miss the signs.
Exactly.
And she
Yeah.
doesn't want to miss the signs anymore by the end of the film.
She even says to one of the doctors in the hospital, he's trying to figure out, what's going on with her, and she talks about this love she has that she wants to give to everybody,
Yeah.
and then he says, well, where does it? He says something along the lines of, well, where is this coming from? And she goes, it was born out of hate, as hatred of herself, which is so interesting. So there are I mean, obviously this experience has brought this on, like has changed her life drastically. So yeah, it is psychologically driven, but at the same time it is for the good, and obviously she does have a lot of love in her, and maybe more love than most people. I mean, she even says to the priest, there's this light, that she's getting, that this love in her can just move mountains. So it is this combination of her being saintly. I mean, even that POV, he utilized POV so well when she goes into the institution and she's looking around at all these women who look like their eyes are just vacant, and
Yeah.
she's looking at them with such compassion. And then the one woman who tries to kill herself, and then it's a POV of her looking at Ingrid Bergman, and Ingrid Bergman's POV looking back at her, and the woman just calms down. I mean, it's like Jesus, like she just had,
Yeah.
she does have this healing power. So I mean, she's certainly nothing about her that is crazy to me. Again, I could
Yeah.
see why they would have thought that, but at the same time, I think it's a combination of hatred. I mean, she says it directly. It's like, I hate myself. I was so selfish. I'm still selfish, and so I have to now turn all my attention outwards and give all my love to people, and just give it to what the ones who need it. I was just really, moved by that. I mean, I
Yeah.
can just see if she gets out of there, she'll just live on the streets. I mean, I've met people like that. That I'm not sure if you have over the years, but I have met people who I suppose nowadays, I don't know if they even label themselves like maybe a monk or something along those lines, or they refuse to handle money, and
Mm.
they live off the land, and they just want a life of purity. It's
Yeah.
pretty interesting. It makes you think about how we live.
Well, and she says at one point, evil is born because we don't give all our love to those who need it most.
Mm,
And
great
I was
line.
like,
Yeah.
this is beautiful. Like I was eating
Yeah.
it up. I'm like, this is phenomenal.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it,
No, it's sorry, go ahead.
no, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's the whole thing is so beautifully done. One thing I also couldn't help but laugh at was that everyone thinks that her actions are must have some kind of motivation other than what she says it is, which is, she says it's out of love. For example, this young man who committed this crime and the cops are after him. He's from the slums that she's been, frequently going to, and she says to him, turn yourself in, like just go and turn yourself in, and he does. And what's interesting is that, as she says, like, if they're, this is a lost soul. So if I she basically gave her love to him, and by saying turn yourself in, she's having faith in the fact that he's going to see that what he did was wrong, as opposed to holding him and fighting it out with him, waiting for the cops. He may never have seen that what he did was wrong if he was just treated that way. But the police say to her, well, you're under arrest for harboring a fugitive. And again, I can see why they would say that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
also, once he turns himself in, she breaks down, because she's so relieved that the faith that she gave to him and the love that he did feel it, and in turn turned himself in. Also, then in the press, they say that there must be some kind of a love affair. That must be why she did this, you know. And even her husband, uh, once, because she's spending so much time with Andrea, she's dressing like him. All the fancy clothes you see off the top now, she's very much dressed down, and so he thinks she's having an affair. Like, why else are you with this guy all the time? And none of these things are true. I mean, and they even, her and her mother comes, and they're concerned about her, and they find like some of these communist like magazines or things that she's reading about communism at first. Again, not that that's what she wants, but this is still at the point where she was just taking Andrea's lead. And so right away they're like, well, if she's reading this, she's got to be crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found that so interesting, this need to label, and that everything is rooted in cynicism. Like, it's got to be an affair. It's got to be that that she's harboring a fugitive because she's having an affair with him. That everyone thinks that she's doing it because there's something in it for her. And that's just totally cynical. And it just makes me think about, you know, myself and people in general. I mean, we do unfortunately think of things that are often negative a lot of the time. You know, I don't know if that would stood out to you at all.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say this, and part of that, just speaking on a cultural level, a part of that is because there have been many people who have claimed things and done the opposite. We've seen damage of people who have claimed things and then taken advantage of others. So when somebody says things, I mean, I'm talking about today's culture, not when the film was made, of course. But I think that there is just something so terrifying to the type of love that doesn't fit into the normal, I use in quotes,
Right.
box.
Right.
And I mean, we see that here, and you know, to her, it's entirely about people. And I think it's funny, but even those who want to talk about love don't know how to talk about, you know, they're like, well, you're with this man, you're having an affair. But even there's I think it's that woman, the woman you listed, the one who has 6 kids,
Yeah.
says
Oh,
men are only
Juliana
good.
Messina.
Yeah, men are only good for one thing, making love, and not, I mean, even that only after you show them how. You know,
All right.
it's like, okay, well, so love has to be sexual.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
okay, well, so you love someone, you must be having, like, you took care of this prostitute, you must have something sexual going on. Like, there's some
Right.
sort of conversation. It's funny, like, I wouldn't claim that this man is my friend, but he is a very close friend of a friend of mine. The guy I know is, I don't know if you want me to say names on the thing or not, but he's a
It's
speaker.
up to you. Yeah.
His name's Tony Campolo. Anyway,
Okay.
so Tony is very much in with people. He cares about the poor. And this story takes place like 30 years ago. This is a true story. You know, he had come from a speaking engagement, and he saw 2 young women on the street, and they were prostitutes. It broke his heart. So he paid for them for the night, but what he did for the night is he brought them up. He said, this room is yours. Order whatever you want from room service. I'm leaving. He said, I want you to feel safe tonight. Get off the streets. Tonight, this room is yours. You won't see me again. And he walked away. There was nothing lurid or anything like that. He was just trying to help out a couple of young women. And he tells this story, and I'm like, my goodness, if a story like that were to happen today, you know, him telling that now, people say, oh, well, that was the 70s or the 80s. But if that were to happen today, how many people would actually believe that nothing went on?
Right. There's always
in that room?
Yeah.
You know, his heart is similar to hers.
Right.
He wants to help. Like, she stays with this woman at the end of the film. That's what quite frankly, the scenes with the woman at the end of the film just reminded me of Tony.
The dying prostitute.
The dying prostitute reminded me of Tony, because she's spending all this time with her, and he's like, I'm just gonna get her to health. And then you know, even the doctor said, well, I mean, if you come to me a couple of weeks ago, like, fine, but she's a goner now, so I don't know why you're even bothering.
Right.
And then she goes into the police station, and they're questioning her. Oh, something's going on. No, I'm trying to help her.
Yeah.
And this word is so foreign when you get to the depth of its meaning, because the way they have accepted, and I say they in the film, but I think we could say we as a culture still we accept certain things about it, and the type of compassion that we see in her character in this film is, it does stand out. It
Oh
does
yeah.
stand out, and
Yeah.
it's because it doesn't fit in the box.
Exactly. Yeah.
And churches love boxes. I'm saying churches as well. Like that's,
Yeah.
the scene with the priest. I thought like
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
that he was going to say, "Hey, you got it right," but it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa, whoa. My box doesn't
Yeah.
include this.
Yeah. He's even disturbed that she quote the Bible in the first person, which I
Yes.
thought, I was like, why is that so disturbing to him? He's like, who told you this?
That's right. I forgot about that scene. I
Yeah,
laughed. I
yeah. I
actually
had
laughed
to
out loud.
I had to look at it a couple of times because I can see that, he's like, well, did he says something along the lines of, I mean, he doesn't say none, but he makes a
Yeah.
strong impression that's what he thinks she's saying, because he's like, well, I understand that you left your husband. And I can see why he would begin to think that's maybe what she meant. And she's like, no, I don't want
Yeah.
to be a nun. Yeah, that was a great scene. And the ending is that, I mean, I've only seen this once before my recent viewing, and that ending is unforgettable as everybody from the slums come and they commit her into this institution, and they're all like screaming out for her, and they shoot it low also looking up, and she does look saintly. I mean,
Yeah.
like the way he shot it even early on in the film when she's bedridden. Again, I can't take credit for noticing this. The On the Criterion Channel, some of these film scholars pointed it out. I think this was by Adriano Apra. He said this: if you look at her husband's face, he has a shadow over his face, and she just is light. There's always so much more light on her. So it's fast. It's very spiritual. I mean, there's people are always trying to make sense of everything, and not everything can just be you know, put in a box and
Yeah.
labeled. So no, it's a fascinating watch. So I'm glad that you took the time to check it out. I'm glad you liked it so much. I had a feeling you would. So
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. I like I said, anything you send me, I'm going to watch and I'm going to engage.
good,
But
good.
this one I saw, I was like, man, it was, the word is like, I could say, oh, it was great, like, because it was. Unexpected is the word I have to describe it.
Yeah,
Because there was a
yeah.
maturity about this film from this era that I was unused to seeing
Hmm.
across the board. And even the fact they're having mature conversations about suicide,
Right.
as opposed to, oh no, it's not dun dun dun. It's just like this thing happens, and it's like, oh, and it shatters lives. I
Mm.
thought, my goodness, how could this film is not from 70 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. It's very ahead. It was very ahead of its time.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways. But for those of you who haven't seen it, it's on the Criterion Channel. There is both the Italian and English version. I wouldn't suggest the English one because they cut out and they talk about in the special features why about 10 minutes of it was cut. So if anyone's interested, you can watch the featurettes as to why that happened. But you can watch the Italian version and the English version if you want on the Criterion Channel. Steve, thanks again for coming on. I appreciate that you took the time as always. So thanks so much. Come again.
Anytime. Thank you, because I always love our chats, and I always
Me
love the
too.
films you send. So it's like, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, Robert. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And just lastly, where can people find you online on Twitter and Instagram? I know you're everywhere.
Oh yeah, we're on the socials, if you will.
Perfect.
Well, our site is screenfish.net. But you can find us on Instagram at I think it's Screenfish Online, and Screenfish News on Twitter. Just look up Screenfish and film, and it'll all come up. We are on all the podcast places where we get your podcasts. We are on YouTube. You can look up Screenfish on YouTube, like and subscribe. And we are where we have our interviews and our pods as well. So you can find us wherever you want, wherever you're looking. I'm hoping you can find us.
Fantastic. And I'll leave those links in the description box
Yes.
below. Fantastic. Well, I'll let you go. And Steve, thanks again.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. And I just want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel and you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. It is absolutely free by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.